Welcome to Because We Care for Young Homemakers Day, a weekly program filled with information on the art of homemaking. And now here's your host, Kimberly Ross.
Hello and welcome to Young Homemaker. Today we are going to learn how to prepare a sensational Thanksgiving meal. And here to guide us is Ella Mae Bard. She is County Extension Agent with the Ohio Cooperative Extension Service. Welcome back, Ella Mae.
Thank you very much. Glad to be with you today.
Most people regard the turkey as the most prominent part of the Thanksgiving meal. So let's begin there. What do we need to ask ourselves before we go into the supermarket to look for that turkey?
Well, you might actually even begin by watching some of the ads before a holiday. Often the ads in the paper will feature a turkey, knowing that that is a major purchase for the family. They may even combine it with some sales, giving a special purchase if you buy, say, $25 worth of other groceries. And so it can be even a better buy than it normally is.
At what point should we go into the store and buy that turkey?
If you're considering a frozen turkey and you have space at home to keep it frozen, it can be purchased weeks and months ahead. But because of those special holiday features, a lot of families like to wait within a week or 10 days of the holiday to purchase their frozen bird and then store it in the freezer at home. If it's a fresh bird that you're looking at, then often you'll want to bring it home just the day before you cook it, 2 at the very most.
I usually don't see fresh turkeys in the grocery.
Often those are by special order because they do have such a brief keeping time, so that if you're interested in those, your markets will normally take orders for those and keep them by name for you in the refrigerator until you pick it up. Any that they happen to purchase that are not sold would be displayed probably the day before Thanksgiving and available for those who had not made earlier arrangements.
Are there any special markings on the package that we need to look for?
Obviously, they come in very different sizes, so size will probably be the key thing that people will want to look for, so they have enough, but plan with in their demands for turkey not to have too much, perhaps. Then other than that, you just may want to have the reassurance of grade and inspection, and that would be present on all turkey that is marketed in particularly in interstate commerce.
That brings up something very important, and that is what kind of turkey, what size of turkey to buy. Say you're having a family of 15. Is there any guideline as to how much turkey to buy?
Certainly the market gives you a lot of variety, and even for families that are expecting lots of company or smaller families, there are availability of turkey to fit their needs. For the small family, they might even consider turkey parts in the amount of their particular interest. For others who are looking at larger groups, or perhaps they just really like to have some extra turkey cooked and put away, they can be looking at whole birds. For the family that, say, just really would like a nice meal, maybe enough leftovers for snacking or a luncheon or something, a pound a person is kind of a rough guide. Beyond that, if you know you would like to have enough for a special casserole or sliced turkey for lunch sandwiches, then you'll need to do some calculations to add those extras, because that's kind of hard to give you a guideline for.
But basically, just for a nice turkey dinner, it's usually a pound a person.
For the dinner, and knowing that there would be some leftovers,
Good.
Right. Obviously, the bone and skin and waist will account for some variation. Looking at turkey and that pound, you would have close to 6 to 8 ounces of edible portion per person, and that's a big serving of protein.
Sure is.
Really enough for about 2 meals.
Once we bring the turkey home, when should we begin to thaw it?
Thawing time really depends on the size of the bird and also how much time you really have left. For example, if you have a 15, 16-pound turkey that's frozen, it would take about 3 days in the refrigerator to thaw. And that is done by just taking the bird from the freezer, perhaps putting it on a platter or in a pan in case the package does leak. But you leave the package intact and just sit it in the refrigerator and forget about it for 3 days. And if it happens to be another size turkey, allow about 24 hours for each 5 pounds of turkey. So a 25-pound bird would take close to 5 days to thaw in the refrigerator.
That's important to keep in mind.
Certainly, to keep it safe. Now, I know sometimes we don't have that long, and there are some shortcut methods that are still safe. And one involves immersing the entire bird under water. Cold water that keeps the surface chilled, still as though it were in the refrigerator, and yet gives it a medium to exchange the heat and thaw it quickly. And there it takes about an hour for every 2 pounds. So if you have a 20-pound bird, it would take about 10 hours in cold water. Now you have to have a fairly deep sink so that you can keep it immersed, and remember to change that water every 30 minutes so that it does stay cold.
That's the only reason to change the water?
Right. You want to keep the water chilled so that it doesn't warm up the edge and cause spoiling on the surface while the inside is thawing. A lot of people, of course, combine the methods. They may immerse it in water for, say, 5 or 6 hours and then leave it in the refrigerator overnight until they need it on the holiday.
Any of those methods are okay?
Those 2 methods are the basic ones for thawing safely in the refrigerator.
What do we do once we begin to prepare the turkey?
Once you are actually ready to start baking or roasting, and when you do that, it just depends again on the size, because cooking time increases as we work with a larger bird. You'll need to calculate when it should be started to cook. And those times are available in a chart, and I frankly don't try to remember those because it does vary as to whether the bird is stuffed and unstuffed, how large it is, and also the cooking method. Different methods will have a slightly different timing. And those are in a book called Talking About Turkey. It's a U.S. Department of Agriculture publication, and I do have a number of copies at the Licking County office of the Ohio Cooperative Extension Service, and I'd be glad to give anyone one if they stop in the office, or if they'd like us to mail it, we'd be glad to do so. With 39-cent postage, we'd be glad to mail it to them.
I've looked through that. It's very helpful.
It is a very well done book and has those charts, and of course many cookbooks and many birds come with a little chart right on the label, so lots of information to help us to calculate when to start. And maybe 20-30 minutes before that, the bird should be removed from the refrigerator, remove the packaging, and then washed. And I might caution that knowing how all the sink gets used, we might start by actually scrubbing the sink first. And if in doubt, maybe a little chlorine bleach in the water that we scrub the sink with before we start washing the turkey. That'll help clean it and get it ready for the bird. So then the bird is just simply washed. At that point, you can remove the package of giblets, which is usually packaged inside the bird, and decide how you're going to use those. In our household, we usually put those in the dressing, so we refrigerate those until a little bit later when we'll be cooking them to make dressing. And for us, we usually use a casserole type dressing, and one that doesn't have to be made then at that point because the bird takes longer to cook than a casserole type dressing.
Do you still recommend stuffing a turkey?
It can be done. I think there are some good cautions for people to realize.
Let's talk about those.
Okay. Dressing has all the elements for food spoilage very quickly, so we do need to handle it with great care. And basically that means making it at the last moment. Now, the dry things can be put together. Some of us will be drying bread several days ahead to get it ready. I might mention to be sure to cut the little squares before you dry the bread. It's a lot easier than trying to work with the dried bread. that all the drying and the dried ingredients can be put together. But whenever moisture is added, then it's time to cook. So that part should not be done ahead.
Okay, so no stuffing it and then setting it in the refrigerator
That's
overnight.
right. As soon as it has the moisture, that might be egg or broth, then it should be started to cook. That warm broth just can set off some fast food spoilage if we don't heat it immediately. And of course the egg and everything else is present that could spoil quickly. In stuffing a bird, to do so very lightly, not to pack it in, but to do so lightly so that there is room for it to expand, because it does kind of swell up a little bit as it is cooking. A lot of people will want to put something in the cavity. It might be just a small amount of dressing or their full recipe. Others will put maybe just a few pieces of celery, something that gives a flavor through the bird while it's roasting.
Is there anything else that needs to be done to the turkey?
Normally not. They are well prepared, just the washing. If you happen to see a little feather that they happen to miss, certainly you'll want to remove that. But they're almost oven ready. So just washing it off and then putting it on your pan. Some will like to oil the surface or perhaps do a preliminary basting with butter.
I use a stick of margarine and smear margarine.
A lot of people will choose margarine or butter, oil. It's just something to kind of grease that surface.
How do we test for doneness in a turkey?
The best way, of course, is a thermometer. I kind of am relieved when the turkey I buy has one of those little built-in ones, then I don't have to worry about getting it in just the right spot. Those small ones can be purchased. They're just a little device that goes into the skin of the turkey and it pops up when it's done. Otherwise, it does involve a meat thermometer and immersing it into a thick portion, usually into the dark meat, and then watching for the registered temperature of 185 degrees. Without that, you can go by wiggling the leg, checking the dark meat to see if it is done.
Are those little buttons pretty accurate?
I think you can rely on those, and if in doubt, you can also give it the moving test to see if the leg does move readily, if the dark meat seems well done. Dark meat does take longer to cook than white meat.
Let's talk about all the other foods that are prominent in a Thanksgiving meal. For instance, the mashed potatoes and gravy, or some of the other things. Can you give us some sort of guideline as to when to fix what so we won't be doing everything at the last minute?
Certainly with a holiday meal, we don't want all those last minute things. For one thing, it does usually mean company, and we want to be able to enjoy the company in that time together. For some families, that might mean taking advantage of those offers of, can I bring something? And certainly the salad or perhaps a dessert is easily carried and maybe something someone else can help you with and take away some of those preparation pressures. The other thing I would suggest is that you take a few moments and sit down and plan out your entire meal. For example, at our house we often end up with mashed potatoes and sweet potatoes. And no one wants to give up both or one or the other, so we end up with both. But that does mean that when you have two choices, even if everyone has some of each, they're going to have less of each. So you need to look at the total menu to decide how much. And that gives you enough without too many glaring leftovers that are hard to store when you have so much food on hand for a special holiday.
Seems like that would be a lot of guesswork, though. Is there any way around that?
Oh, I think cooking is always guesswork, but still, it's not guessing out of the blue sky, but with experience and calculating about half-cup servings of vegetables. And yet, you know, a given person is very fond of one, so maybe you put in a little extra for them. So it's not really sky blue guessing. It's kind of calculating And cook's calculations are the whole basis for meal planning.
That's really the fun of Thanksgiving, though.
A lot of people enjoy that.
2 entrees of potatoes and half a dozen varieties of vegetables.
Yeah, I think certainly we enjoy the meal, and yet I think we must remember that it's not an excuse to either destroy the food budget for the entire week or to overeat and ruin all the good feelings with a stomach ache because we've eaten too much. So we probably shouldn't use it as a total excuse for gross overeating.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about a typical Thanksgiving menu, in case there are some young homemakers out there who have never done this before. They may be at a loss or they may not be able to remember a Thanksgiving back when everything was on the table. So could you give us an idea of what a typical menu would be like?
Well, I think as with any meal, a holiday time lets that family plan something that's special for them. They may have a special vegetable that's traditional with them that may not fit into someone else's pattern. So there's not any special rules that everyone has to follow. It's a chance for you to do your own family special thing. One of the things I would say to a hostess planning a meal is to watch too many fussy things, too many fancy things. Oftentimes, one meal should only have one fussy, fancy thing that takes either a lot of time or expense. Then other things that complement it might be very simple. Maybe a plain frozen vegetable just seasoned with margarine or butter to complement a very special salad. Or perhaps it's the vegetable that's fussy with special nuts or a topping or something. And then the salad is very simple. And all of that complements the preparation time, but it also complements the food. It's sort of like if we were planning a wardrobe. Too many fussy, dressy things kind of show each other up. And that's true in meal planning too.
What are some traditional foods?
Oh, I think a lot of us will use sweet potatoes. As you say, the mashed potatoes often will go along with it. Certainly a dressing or stuffing kind of thing. Others will like an oyster stew or an oyster dressing. Other families never use that. Something that goes well might be an apple salad or cranberries. Certainly cranberry sauce or relish is very appropriate with turkey.
What about the desserts? Now, we can't forget about those.
Oh, the sweet tooths are showing up here. Oh, I would suggest with desserts that families look at, again, some of their favorites, but be realistic. With 16 people, we don't really need 6 pies, for example. To plan a little closer than that, and again, we eliminate either unwanted leftovers or those excuses for eating just a little piece because it's going to be thrown away. Thinking in terms of pie, I have one uncle who just really likes mincemeat, so that might be a possibility for those who care for that. Others, of course, will look for pumpkin pie.
Is one dessert sufficient? One type of dessert?
Oh, again, I think it often goes with your with the number. If I'm looking at 4 or 5 people, then I'd be tempted to be limited to one dessert. But as the number of people increase, the number of choices can increase. But the secret is don't make enough of everything for everybody, or at least not full servings. Maybe if you have 2 desserts, then make enough for half and half.
What's the worst that can happen? You'll run out of one thing and they can just eat something else, right?
Well, like for example on pie, if you have the 16 people you mentioned, probably 3 pies you're looking at that point, and cutting them in maybe 8 pieces each, or 12, so that they're small pieces, and if they really like it, they can take 2 small pieces. If they don't, if they want some of each, they can take little pieces of each one.
Let's back up a little bit and talk about the scheduling of making this food. What can you make at the very first, and that will keep for a little while?
If you're choosing a gelatin salad, or oftentimes some of the cranberry combinations, the relishes and sauces, if you're making those at home, those can easily be made the day before, and sometimes even further ahead. Some of the cranberry relishes, for example, ground up with oranges and nuts, and that can be made and even frozen several days, weeks ahead. Gelatin, obviously, the day before, or even a couple of days ahead. If you're looking at a tossed salad, maybe only the lettuce can be washed and carefully stored, but obviously not dressed until just before. Most of our frozen vegetables don't really need any preliminary treatment, and that's another nice reason for including them, so it doesn't take that extra fussiness. Potatoes, I don't like really to peel that much ahead of time, because soaking them in water does take away the good vitamin C that's there. So that's going to be one of those jobs for within a half an hour, 45 minutes of serving time.
Well, what sort of preparations can be made while the turkey is cooking?
Oftentimes for a noon meal on a holiday, that turkey is going to be in fairly early in the morning, so there are lots of jobs left to be done besides setting the table and that kind of thing. Exactly what is going to have to depend on what your oven situation is. If you happen to have one only oven, then obviously we can't be baking pies and doing the turkey at once. And so it may change or affect what choices you happen to have in dessert. If you can't do that baking in the morning, so you may well choose a pie that can be made the day before, say a double crust fruit pie, as opposed to a meringue pie that really should be done within hours of serving.
What about a pumpkin pie? Can those be done the night before?
To me, they are best served within an hour or two of when they are baked, but they do hold up fairly well, but would be refrigerated overnight because it is a custard base.
What other things can we do while that turkey is cooking?
Well, if it's a company day and so forth, I hope there are times to enjoy your company and not spend it all in the kitchen. Certainly, if you haven't looked at the salad, maybe you can get those fixings ready if you're serving a salad. I think that's one I usually just don't include. There's so many other vegetables and the extra things that go with a Thanksgiving or a Christmas dinner that I often just eliminate the salad in that meal and rely on the other vegetables filling in.
Is it all right to ask for help?
Sure. And many people offer, and they sincerely want to help. And so take advantage of that. In my household, I always have my brother slice up the turkey. He does a far better job than I can. And at that point, I'm usually busy with the gravy, and my mother mashes the potatoes so that everyone has a little job. And for a company meal, we leave my father talking with the company and keeping them entertained for a bit while we do those last minute things.
Sometimes it's a little hard when you're in someone else's kitchen to know quite what to do and quite where to find it.
Right. And sometimes our kitchens are small enough that we really don't have too much room for those extra people. But often they might help pour milk, prepare the beverages, that kind of thing. Doesn't take a lot of extra equipment for them to have to find, but to have the glasses and the beverages, they can get those parts ready.
Speaking of smaller kitchen, that brings up something else that I want to talk about. Some special problems that can occur while you're having company over. What about a big family in a small house? What can we do about that?
Well, probably just moving around gets to be part of the problem, especially if you're bringing food to the table and then wanting to remove it easily. And so as I have more people around, I often go to more of a buffet setup rather than putting all the food on the table. And if that's their choice, to me that one becomes a little bit easier, particularly in terms of setting the table. And also it lends itself to using several tables, whether it happens to be a card table or a kitchen table and a dining room table, so that you don't have to have extra food or 2 dishes of food on every table.
Serving buffet style brings up some other concerns that you might want to address. Some special precautions?
Well, I think for a family meal or a given meal as a buffet, it would move along fairly smoothly. If you happen to end up with an open house or some of those festive things that might not specifically be related to Thanksgiving, but more with Christmas or some of the party entertaining, then you'll want to be concerned about a buffet that is out for a prolonged time. An all afternoon or an all day buffet needs some special care. To some extent just for the enjoyment. We want to keep hot foods hot and cold foods cold so that they taste better, but also for a safety factor. And for an all-day buffet, it often means putting out small amounts and then refreshing that every hour or so, exchanging a platter. Maybe it's a platter of cold cuts or, in this case, turkey, and within an hour, taking that off and putting on a new plate rather than everything out at once and leaving it out for 4 or 5 hours.
What is the maximum length of time you can leave a food
It
out?
really varies with what the food is, but as kind of a general guideline, we look at 2 hours. Now that's assuming that it was fresh food and not contaminated in the first place. So that gets to be pretty much of a caution.
Can we stick it in the refrigerator, let it cool down, and bring it back out?
No. If it's been out for more than a couple hours, we're into the tossing time on many foods. And again, that depends on what it happens to be. Something very high in acid, not susceptible to spoilage, we might get away with refrigerating a leftover bean salad or something. But if sliced cold cuts or turkey are out in a hot room for 2 hours, anything that's left over, I usually would toss.
Not even feed it to the dog?
It depends.
Well, we don't have to get into that.
Yeah, we won't want to take responsibility for any dog illnesses there.
Right. Can you think of any festive touches that you would add to a Thanksgiving meal or a celebration that would just give it a lift?
I think with any meal, not just at holiday times, but presentation is an awful lot of how we feel about a meal. And some don't like that extra fussiness, but to me that's always kind of special. And it doesn't have to be linen and lace, but certainly the table covering napkins can make a difference. And I suppose with Thanksgiving we often associate the cornucopia. So if you happen to have one, the apples and bananas and things that you might have on hand as part of your regular fruit and vegetables through the week can suddenly become a very nice centerpiece by flowing through the center of the table and reminding us that the abundance of Thanksgiving is what is behind that holiday in its first place. And then sometimes with a holiday, if you do want to add any special little touch, it might be a choice of dishes or maybe even a little favor if there's special guests and you want them to remember that day.
That sounds nice. I hope you learned something. I sure did, and I hope you have a great holiday meal. See you next time. Thank you, Alame.